Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Moed Kattan Daf Chaf Aleph, and we're starting 3 lines from the bottom of the previous Amud of Chaf Amud Beis, in the midst of sugyas about the halachos of being an avelos. And the Gemara tells a story 3 lines from the bottom. Ameimar Shachiv Le Barbarei. Nebuch, he lost a grandchild, Barbarei, the son of his son. So, having lost the son of his son, what was his reaction? Because yesterday we learned there was a machlokas in the Tanaim. We learned about whether or not one is obligated to sit shiva for the ring around you. For, like, let's say this is Ameimar, the grandfather. If the son is sitting shiva on his son, does Ameimar, the grandfather, also have to sit shiva? So what did he do? So the Gemara says, Kara ilave, that Ameimar tore kriya on his grandson, and then asa berei, and then when his son walked into the room, Ameimar's son walked into the room, then Kara be'ape, then Ameimar tore a second time to show that he was a brother in arms, that he was in Avelus with his son. And then he realized Idkar Demiyushav Kara. He realized then that he tore Kriya while he was sitting down, and therefore Kam Kara Me Umad. And then he got up and he tore while he was standing. So there's a lot of layers to this, but the Gemara, this is Machlokas, we showed him how to read this Gemara. All of the pronouns of he are not so clear, but the pashtus of the Gemara is the way that I just described it, that Ameimar tore Kriya 3 times. He tore when he heard about his grandson, he tore Kriya when his son walked in the room. And then when he realized that he tore Kriya when his son walked in the room sitting down, he stood up and tore Kriya again. Fine. That's it. What? Not really, no. Not really. Just wait till you're vamos. This is ABCs. This is just a grandfather-grandson. This one's an easy one. Omar le Ravashi la Ameimar. Ravashi says to Ameimar, why did you have to tear Kriya standing up? Why did you re-tear? So last line of Chaf Amud Beis, Kriya dem'umad minolan. From where do we know that one is obligated to tear Kriya while they're standing? This is taka the case that people stand when Kriya is torn. So says the Gemara, that Eov stood up and then he tore Kriya upon a loss of a loved one. So that's very clear from the pasuk that you're supposed to stand for Kriya. Says the Gemara at the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Hold on one second. But the rest of the pasuk, and not in regards to this, but in regards to Chalitza Elameata, if what you're saying is that because the pasuk by Eov said that he stood up by Yaakov, well, there's a pasuk by Chalitza that has a similar language. What does the pasuk by Chalitza say? Elameata, if what you're saying is true about Eov, then maybe we should say the same is true by Chalitza. That a person has an option that if a woman loses her husband and she has no children, and the husband has a brother, they perform yibum. And if the husband doesn't want to marry this woman who was his sister-in-law, his brother's wife, then he can say lo chafarti lekachta. But what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says ve'amad. So would we say hachanami? Would we say that here too he has to stand when he does chalitza? No, it doesn't have to do that. V'hatanya, the Brisa writes, ben yoshe, ben omeid, ben moteh. Whether or not he's sitting, standing, or leaning on his side, one can perform chalitza. So we see there that the language of Amad in the pasuk is lav dafka. So Amar le, no, that's not a good argument. Hasam, over there by the case of chalitza, lo ksiv, it does not say vaya'amod and vayomer. Look at the top line. It says ve'amad and ve'amar. It's not in the future of what you shall do. It's past tense. And hacha, here by Eov, the language was different. It's ksiv in the future, vayakom, and he should stand up, and he stood up. Vayikra. So it says it was like an activity, like step 1 is X, step 2 is Y. But Ve'amad is past tense, and therefore we less of a raya. So Amar Rami Bar Chama, Minayin L'Kriya Shehu Ma'umad. This is our second answer, and it's actually from the same pasuk, but we're going to see that it gets rejected. And he quotes our Gemara as well, our pasuk, Shenemar Vayakom Eov Vayikra. We learn from Eov that one has to tear Kriya Ma'umad, standing up, just like Ameimar did. Says the Gemara, maybe not. Maybe Dilma Milsa Yaserta Huda. Maybe it was just extraneous. He didn't have to stand, but he wanted to stand. He just has, sometimes people stand during davening and they don't need to. They just want to. So maybe that's all that's happening here. And in fact, we have an argument in favor of this being something extraneous. Dilote Mahachi, the pasuk also says, in Sefer Eov, if you look on the side at the actual pasuk, the pasuk reads Vayakom Eov Vayikra Es Me'ilo, and it also says Vayagez Es Rosho, and he shore his hair, he cut his hair. So Achanami, would we say that there's a requirement to cut your hair? Of course, that's not the case. Ella, says the Gemara, we therefore have to pivot and come up with another answer. We can no longer use the pasuk in Eov because otherwise there's a misunderstanding in the pasuk in Eov from the word Vayagez that he has to cut his hair. So therefore, another pasuk Ela Mehacha must be Vayakam HaMelech Vayikra Es Begadav, a pasuk from Sefer Shmuel, I think. Yeah, a pasuk from Sefer Shmuel. He stood up and he tore kriya. Says the Gemara, maybe there too, but Dilma Milsi is Ser Ta'abid. Maybe there it wasn't necessary to be done. After all, the ilote machi, if you don't say that, then what does it mean by Yishkav Arza, that he has to lie on the ground? Tanya, the Brisa writes, Yashan, that should be a nun. That's the change in the girsa over here. But we showed him Yashan, and that's the way that it should be written. It's quoted this way later in the Masechta. Yashan al gabe mita, if he lies down on a bed, al gabe kise, on a chair, al gabe udaini. An udaini, what is that? That's like the covering of a pit. So then, lo yatsa yidei chova. So Amar Rav Yochanan shelo kiyim kfiyas hamita. So we see there, Vayishkav Arsa, that only in regards to kfiyas hamita is it true, but otherwise you don't have an obligation to lie down. It's the pasuk is lav dafka. So Amar le ke'ein arza. The right way to understand the pasuk is that it's ke'ein arza, Vayishkav Arsa, ke'ein arza, meaning that he has to do kfiyas hamita, and therefore we have a pasuk that actually supports this idea that the reason that we know that we have to do Kriya Me'umad is from the pasuk in Sefer Shmuel that reads Vayakam HaMelech Vayikras Begadav. Third of the way down on Chaf Aleph Amar Aleph, the Gemara says Tanu Rabbanan Be'ilu Dvarim Sha'avel Aser Behem. These are the things that an Avel is not allowed to do. Aser B'Malacha, he's not allowed to do certain types of labor. Ubirachitza, no showering. Uvesicha, they cannot anoint themselves. Uvetash Meshamita, no intimacy. Uvenilas Asandal, they cannot wear leather shoes. Aser Likros B'Torah Uvenevim Uviksuvim, they cannot learn Tanakh. But Lishnos b'Mishnah, they cannot learn Mishnayos. But Medrash, they can't learn Medrash. Uvehalachos, they can't learn Shulchan Aruch. Uvetalmud uveagados, they can't learn Gemara and they can't learn Agadatas. So says the Gemara. However, v'im hayu rabim tzrichim lo eino nimna, that if the masses need this person, if he is the Magid Shiur of the whole base Medrash, you have the rabbis of a shul is the classical example of this. So then eino nimna, we cannot stop them from teaching Torah. They possess a certain capacity to do things that others don't. So therefore, Rabim Tzrichim lo, they're allowed to teach. And the Gemara tells a couple stories about this halfway down. Umaiso meis benosha Rabbi Yossi b'tzipori. Rabbi Yossi's son Nebuch passed away. V'nichnas lebeis hamedrash v'dorash kol yom kulu. He taught Torah the whole entire day. Rabbi Bar Chana Isra Bamilsa, he was sitting Shiva, and Savar Delo Lemepak Lepirka, and he thought that he's not allowed to go out Lepirka. Lepirka means to go learn, to go to the base Medrash. Amar Le Rav says to him, Tanina, we have a Mishnah, Hayu Rabim Srichen Lo Eino Nimna. You do not have to hold back from teaching if the masters need you. Okay, so he walked into the base Medrash to teach. He's in the middle of Shiva. He wanted to teach, and Savar Leokme Amora Ale. We know, of course, that when a Rebbe would teach, he would just whisper the words into the mouth of someone who was the actual orator, and the orator would repeat after him and be the mouthpiece. So he wanted to have a regular Amora, a regular speaker to speak on his behalf. Amar Le Rav, yes, I told you that you can come out and teach, but you're not allowed to have a regular Maturgaman, Tanya, because the Brisa writes, Yami Turgaman. You're not allowed to speak through a regular Turgaman. So if that's true, the Gemara says 4 or 3 lines before the wide lines, well, what's he supposed to do? He doesn't have the voice to teach in this way without a Maturgaman. So what should he do? So says the Gemara, Tanya, the Brisa writes as follows: Maiso Meis Benosha Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. The son of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi died. V'nichnas lebeis hamedrash. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi went in to teach. V'nichnas Reb Chananya ben Akavya v'yoshav b'tzido. Reb Chananya ben Akavya sat next to Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. V'lo chashul Reb Chananya ben Akavya. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi whispered the shiur to Reb Chananya ben Akavya's ear, and then the game of telephone. And then first long line, Reb Chananya ben Akavya, L'tzorgaman Ishmael Rabim. There had to be some type of added person into the chain, huh?
Some kind of change.
Yeah, some kind of shinui, an abnormal way of using a maturgaman. He had to teach it in an abnormal way. It's mutter to teach if a person's ba'avelus, but nevertheless, it should be done in an indirect way, not directly through a maturgaman, but rather through one person and that person to a maturgaman. That's the right way to do it. 2 lines into the wide lines, 3/4 of the way down. Tana Rabban, and the rabbis teach us in a brisa. Avel Gimel Yomim Harishonim, the first 3 days of the death after a person is buried. Asher lahaniach tefillin. The first day is really mixas hayom kikulo, and really day 3 also seems to be mixas hayom kikulo. How do I know that? Because it says asher lahaniach tefillin, but then the next words say bishlishi va'elach, from the 3rd day and on, bishlishi bichlal, and the 3rd day is included. So day 1 and day 2 are not allowed to have tefillin. And day 3, only part of the day. And then on day 3, you can actually put on tefillin. So that's bichlal. And mutter laniach tefillin. Then on that 3rd day and on, one is allowed to, let's say the burial was on a Monday. So Monday is day 1. Tuesday is day 2. Wednesday is day 3. Then on Wednesday, he's allowed to put on tefillin. So mixas hayom kikulo on Monday is day 1. Full day is Tuesday. Mixas hayom kikulo is day Tuesday. That's day 3. Then he can put on tefillin. Bimbo panim chadashos. If people who are not at the levaya and who may not have known what was going on, they see this guy wearing tefillin, maybe they might have mistakenly thought that he didn't keep halacha and he wore tefillin on day 2, which is not allowed. Don't worry, says the Gemara, eino cholitz. He doesn't have to take off his tefillin before panim chadashos. He can keep his tefillin on. That's Tivi Rabbi Eliezer. However, Rabbi Yoshua disagrees. 10 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, that when it comes to tefillin, avel beis yamim harishonim asar l'nech tefillin. 2 days he's not allowed to wear tefillin. Day 1 and day 2 of burial, and that means that day 1 is mixas hayom kikulo. If the person's buried 5 minutes before shkia, that's day 1. And after he wakes up, after the sun rises 5 minutes later, it's mixas hayom kikulo day 2. And on day 2, he can put on tefillin. How does this play out? So Rabbi Yeshua says, avel beis yamim harishonim asar l'nech tefillin, that for the first 2 days he's not allowed to wear tefillin. Misheni va'elach v'sheni bichlal. However, from the 2nd day, and including the 2nd day, mutter l'haniach tefillin. However, he argues on that front and on another front. Bo panim chadashos cholitz. And if there are new people who come along to pay a shiva call, they were out of town, they didn't know exactly when the person died, so then cholitz, he should take off his tefillin, lest one think that he was wearing tefillin incorrectly on day 1. Okay, let's try to understand each of these shitas. Amar of Masna, my time of the Rabbi Eliezer. Why is it that Rabbi Eliezer holds the way that he does, that you're allowed to wear tefillin on day 3, but not days 1 and 2? Because it's yemei in the plural. The smallest amount of time of yemei is 2 days. It's plural, 1, 2. And therefore he says those first 2 days can have no tefillin, but day 3 can have tefillin. Amar Rav Ina, my time is Rabbi Yoshua. Why does Rabbi Yoshua say you can wear tefillin on day 2 but not day 1? There's 1 day that's exceptionally bitter. And now let's cross-check each person against the other. Rabbi Yoshua, Nami Haksiv V'itamu Yemei. Rabbi Yoshua, what about the pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer leans upon to say no tefillin on the first 2 days? What are you going to do with the word Yemei? Amar Lach, what would he say to you? Shani Moshe the Takif Evle. But that was referring to the death of Moshe. Moshe's death was unique, and because Moshe's death was unique, yes, it was more intensive, and therefore it was 2 days. But in general, it's only 1 day. And Rabbi Eliezer, Nami Haksiva Acharisa Kiyomar. What are you going to do about the fact that the pasuk says that there's a day that's particularly bitter? He's maskim. So he says, you're right. Ikra Mari Rachad Yomahu. It's true that there's only 1 day that's very, very bad, but day 2 is still extremely bad, and therefore you can't wear tefillin on that day. How do we paskin? Amar Ula. Ula says a complicated thing, and it's going to come back potentially to bite him. Ula, what does he say? Halacha Rabbi Eliezer bechalitza. We paskin like Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to chalitza, taking off tefillin, and that is that you don't have to take off tefillin on day 3. Ve'alacha Rabbi Yoshua behanacha, and halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua that you're allowed to put on tefillin on day 2. So it says the Gemara, that leaves a gap which causes a question for Ula. What's the question? 4 lines from the bottom. We don't know. We know that he holds like Rabbi Eliezer on day 3 that you are not cholitz, and we know that you have to wear tefillin even on day 2, like the sheet of Rabbi Yoshua. But what would he say in the middle ground of taking off your tefillin? On the 2nd day, should he take off his tefillin in front of panim chadashos, in front of new people? Yes or no? So the Gemara says 3 lines from the bottom. You have to take off your tefillin and put it back on many times. And so that's obviously one should take off their tefillin and then put it back on when those people leave. The Brisa writes as follows: if people walk in, their panim chadashos, take off your tefillin. Rava says that once you put on your tefillin, you no longer take them off. That's very strange because we learned yesterday the sheet of Rava that really it's 3 days. So why is it that you would say that you would not take off your tefillin. Why? That seems to imply that you're holding like a different, more complicated shita, like the shita of Rabbi Yehoshua. But how can you say that you held on the previous page? It's 3 days. Now you're saying it's only 1 day of intensive shiva. As we turn to the top of Chafala from the base, the Gemara posits an answer that mitzvah shiny. Rava does agree to that fact about 3 days, but he says that when it comes to the mitzvah of tefillin, things are different. Rashi says on the top of the page, Dibur Maschal mitzvah shiny, klomar, as if to say, because he's able to put it on immediately. So once you put it on, then you should leave it on, even though he holds that the first 3 days are really intensive. But when it comes to tefillin, which is mutter to put on day 2, that's not a kasha in his general shita. On the top line of Chafala from the base, the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis teach us a halacha and a brisa. That the first 3 days, there are restrictions and activities that an Avel has to keep. And that's true even for someone who gets funded from the community tzedakah pot, whatever that is. Mikan va'ilach, but after the first 3 days, so days 4, 5, 6, and 7, he's allowed to do work, but oseh bitzina b'soch beisa, so he can do the work, but it has to be only in his house. V'isha taba b'pelach b'soch beisa, a woman is allowed to utilize a spindle to make thread even in her home, and that is the din by malacha. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis teach in another brisa, Avel gilma yamim rishonim, for the first 3 days, and oholech lebeis ha'avel. If a person is sitting shiva and then they want to go pay a shiva call to someone that they're friends with who's now overlapping with their shiva, you're not allowed for the first 3 days. But mikan va'elach, from days 4, 5, 6, and 7 of shiva, no problem. Mikan va'elach holech, he's allowed to go. However, and interestingly, he can go. However, the eino yoshe b'makom hamenachamin el b'makom hamisnachamin. He doesn't have to sit. He's not allowed to sit with the people who are facing the avelim on the full height chairs, but rather if he's going to pay a shiva call during his shiva, when really he has an obligation to sit within 3 tvachim of the ground, so then he has to sit with the misnacham and the ones who are getting the chama. He has to sit in the low chairs. He's not allowed to sit in a regular chair. Next, Tanu Rabbanan, this will take us basically almost to the end of the day. It'll take us to the end of the day. We're going to be stopping 4 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us yet again in a brisa, Avel Gimel Yomim Harishonim, for the first 3 days of Shiva Asr B'She'elas Shalom. There's no Shalom Alechems to or from an Avel. Mishlosh V'ad Shiva, from days 3 to day 7, Meishiv, he's allowed to answer. If someone comes up to him and says Shalom Alechem, he's allowed to respond. The Avel is allowed to respond, Alechem Shalom. But ve'eno shoel, he doesn't initiate, he doesn't instigate the conversation to say Shalom Aleichem. Mikan va'elach, after day 7, shoel umeshiv kedarko, he returns to normal. This is subject to a lot of discussion in the Gemara, and here's question number 1. You said in the Gemara, 9, 10 lines down on Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, you said Shloshi Yamim Harishonim Asur B'She'elas Shalom, that the first 3 days you're not allowed to say She'elas Shalom. The problem is that the Gemara has a big story that doesn't agree with that. Next 5, 6 lines, 8 lines maybe, discuss a story that goes against this Gemara. The Gemara had said in the Brisa, no She'elas Shalom on the first 3 days, but what about Rabbi Akiva? V'hatanya, the Brisa writes, Maaseh, there was a story, Umesu banav shel Rabbi Akiva, and his children, Nebuch, passed away, 2 of his sons. Nichnasu kol ha'aretz v'hispidum hesped gadol. He was a gadol ador. Everybody came in and they had a huge hesped for him. B'shas p'tirasan, when they died, Amar Rabbi Akiva al safsal gadol v'amar, at the time of their levaya, it's not literally the time of their ptira, Amar Rabbi Akiva al safsal gadol, he stood on a bench, v'amar, chenu beis Yisrael shimu, afilu shnei banim chasanim, 2 of my married children, menucham hu b'shvil kavod she'asisim. There's comfort here because of what you've done. V'im b'shvil Akiva basim, if you only came because of Akiva, some of the Meforshim here say it's because he was a wealthy man. They were coming for the wrong reasons. Harei kama Akiva b'shuk. There are a lot of people who have money. I'm not the only one. Elakach amartem. Really, what you're saying is Torah selokav b'libo. You believe in the Torah. V'kol sheken shescharchem kafel. You're going to get a lot of reward. And here is the very difficult line that we don't understand. L'chulu v'atechem l'shalom. He wished them shalom. Hold on one second. Our Brisa said you're not allowed to wish shalom during the first 3 days. So how could Rabbi Akiva stand up on the bench and say everyone l'chulu shalom, that you get a shalom aleichem? That doesn't sound right. So it says the Gemara halfway down Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, you're right, but kavod rabim, it's rabim shiny. It's different when you're dealing with the masses. So that seems to imply when we put these 2 halachos together, the Brisa does indicate that there is no shalom aleichem in the first 3 days, with the qualification of if for individuals. However, if it's going to be for the rabbim, then one is allowed to say Shalom Aleichem. Migimel ve'ad zayin, we had said, going back to the Brisa, it said from days 3 to day 7 that Meishiv ve'eno shoel. Let's try to understand this. And we said Mikan va'elech shoel u'meishiv kedarko, that after day 7, you return to normal. Uriminhu, we have a problem. Let's say that you meet your friend on day 28. He's within 30 days of his avelus. So then, then you do nichum avelem. However, you're not allowed to say shalom aleichem. After 30 days, it's reversed. Then you can say shalom aleichem. But then you're not allowed to say tanchumen. The Gemara continues in this brisa, but we already have pronounced our question. I will detail it more in a minute. If a man dies and marries another woman, so if a man dies and he remarries within Shloshim, bad politics, but if he remarries within Shloshim, so then the Gemara says that you're not allowed to be in his house giving him nichum avelim. And the Meforshim explained because it's not good for the new Rebbitzin. The new wife is there and everybody's walking in. Your wife was so wonderful. Your wife is so wonderful. Yeah. It's not nice. It's not a good move. Matzah b'shuk. However, if you find this guy outside of his house during 30 days, Omer lo b'safa rafa b'choved rosh, you're allowed to give nichum avelim. It should be a little shrouded. It shouldn't be so clear, but be like, I'm just so sorry. You're going through a lot. I'm here for you. Something a little bit more vague, but not so specific. We see multiple examples here in this brisa, 2 examples where someone is giving shalom and someone is doing nichum avelim after day 7. Why is that happening? Our brisa that we saw above said that there is no problem with shalom aleichem after day 7. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, who shoel b'shalom acherim, she'acherim shurim b'shalom. The guy who's in avelus is allowed to ask about other people, she'acherim shurim b'shalom, because those people don't have avelus. They're happy people, all is well. But here it's different. Acherim ein shoelim b'shalom, but others are not allowed to ask him anything. Shehu eino sharui b'shalom, and the brisa was referring about acherim when it said that there's no such thing as shalom aleichem afterwards. But really, for the avel, he's allowed to ask for shalom aleichem after day 7, provided that he's asking someone who's not in avelus. Says the Gemara, that's problematic because we saw in the brisa above that Migimel Va'ad Zayin, it says that from days 3 to 7 you can respond. We assume that responding is the case, and somebody had to ask him, but you just said that they weren't allowed to ask him. I don't know. You can't have it both ways. Either they're not allowed to ask him or they are. If they're allowed to ask him, that's why he's being meshiv. But you just said they're not allowed to ask him. Of course he can be meshiv if they ask, but they shouldn't be asking. Says the Gemara, the lo yade, they didn't know that he was an avelu, so then he was meshiv. Says the Gemara, Yachi hasam nami, in regards to just responding, he should have said something. Says the Gemara, hasam, you're right. Hasam over there, Moed lahu v'lo mahader lahu. In some cases, in between days 3 and day 7. So then what you're going to do is you're going to say to someone, I'm so sorry. I know you wished me shalom aleichem. I'm not even allowed to respond. Nebuch, the person was within the first 3 days of avelus. But hacha, after day 3 and between days 3 and 7, if he makes a mistake, lo tzarach la'odi'inhu, you don't have to throw him under the bus. That awful feeling. I did this once when I was calling up the Rosh Kollel in Eretz Yisrael, and I had a concern about which apartment I was going to have, and I did not know he was in avelus. Awful. I'm calling about something so trite and so not important. Shalom Alecha, Rebbe Umori, classic introduction to a rabbi. Just wanted to speak about the apartment. And he's like, my mother died. And I'm like, oh, that awful feeling. So that's what the Gemara is saying here, that in days 1, 2, and 3, you have no choice. The Avel is not allowed to accept that She'elas Shalom, and he's not allowed to be Meshiv. He has to throw it back in your face, and then you feel terrible, and you try to be contrite. It doesn't work. You just feel bad for a couple of days, and then you get over it. But that's how it is. There's another problem, though, Raminhu. We have another problem here. We're 3/4 of the way down, getting to the end of today's daf. If a person finds his friend within 12 months, wow, now we've extended this to 12 months, that one is not allowed to say She'elas Shalom up to 12 months. And la'achar yud beis chodesh, the brisa concludes that after 12 months, that after 12 months, you can say Shalom Aleichem, but then we don't do Nichum Avelim anymore after 12 months. The brisa concludes, you're allowed to say something that's kind of circuitous, something that's a little bit on the periphery. I'm just so sorry. I know it's been a long year. What? Oh, circuitous?
Circuitous, periphery, what?
Read a book, Mark.
I read a book. It's called like picture books.
You read picture books?
It's bad enough having to translate all this other stuff that you're saying.
So about medaber imo min atzad, you can say something that's not direct, indirect, something indirect about the avelus. And Amar Rabbi Meir, the Brisa continues. A guy coming in at month number 13 after an avelus, he comes in to try to do nichum avelim. He's pouring salt on a wound, and says the Gemara, what's that comparable to? The Adam shenishbara raglo v'chaisa. Someone broke their leg a long time ago, and now he's healed and he's walking perfectly fine. Mitzau rofe v'omerlo. Can you just come to my office? I'll re-break your leg so that I can heal you. I'm so good at my job. I'm going to break your leg and heal you. So it's nice that you want to do nichum avelim in month 13. Sorry, it's not about you. It's about the avel. You're coming in beyond the 11th hour. You're coming in after the fact, and you think you're so great that you're going to, no, it's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, why is it that we have an Isra of She'ela Shalom up to 12 months? Hare, the Brisa before this said 30 days. And even the Brisa before that said only 3 days, maybe 7 days, the different shitas. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha ba'avi v'imo habishar krovim. This is halacha l'maisa. It's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. It's quoted in Shulchan Aruch in the halachos of Avelus, that when it comes to Avi v'imo, if a person is sitting in Avelus for the 12 months for a parent, then you're not allowed to say Shalom Aleichem to them. Should they respond in kind? They could probably be Mesha, but you're not allowed to initiate that for a person who's in Avelus. It's very, very difficult to do that because we're a culture of Shalom Aleichem. That's like our norm. That's like our greeting, but it is problematic when a person's in Avelus. And it is a stark reminder to an Avel that they are still in Avelus, that they lost a parent. Hasam Nami says the Gemara, maybe we should still say Yadameri Motan Chumen Minatzad. Maybe he should also do Nicham Avelim in a backhanded manner. Says the Gemara, Nachanami, you're right. What does it mean that he shouldn't say something Tanchumen? It's Kedarko. He shouldn't speak regularly. Aval Medaberi Mo Minatzad. However, he is allowed to say something that's a little bit indirect and circuitous. We'll end on a strong word. Wishing you all a beautiful night. And my schedule next week is all messed up. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll have to figure out. I have no idea when I'm doing any of them, but we'll figure it out. I will be here for the Siyum next Thursday. Have a great night. Kol Tuv.
Wednesday at 7:30 a.m.